For so many people living with post-traumatic stress disorder, that search for relief can feel like this constant uphill battle. But what if the key to healing wasn't just about revisiting the past, but about rewiring the brain's most basic, most primal survival instincts? Well, today we're going to dive into the first ever clinical trial of a really fascinating new therapy called deep brain reorienting, or DBR for short. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the problem that DBR is trying to solve, what we call the PTSD treatment gap. Then we'll get right into the nuts and bolts of how this thing actually works inside the brain. We'll walk through the step-by-step process of the therapy, dig into the results of this brand new clinical trial, and then we'll wrap up by looking at what all of this could mean for the future of healing from trauma. So you've probably heard about the gold standard treatments for PTSD, right? Well, here's the tough part. They just don't work for everybody. Not even close. A huge number of people still really struggle with their symptoms, and that's created what researchers call a major treatment gap. And that gap, well, it's screaming for new, more effective options. And that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's what's pushing scientists and therapists to find new ways forward. And when you actually look at the data, you start to see just how big this problem really is. Let's just start with this number, because it is staggering. The research we're looking at shows that for the most common PTSD therapies out there, the non-response rate can be as high as 50%. Yeah, you heard that right. Up to half of the people who go through these treatments don't get the relief they so desperately need. And that's not all. The dropout rates are another massive hurdle. Over 18%, that's nearly 1 in 5 people, who just quit treatment before they can finish. And a lot of times, it's because the therapy itself is just too overwhelming to get through. It's pretty clear we need a different kind of approach. And this is where deep brain reorienting, or DBR, enters the picture. It's a totally new type of therapy that's built from the ground up, based on what we know about the brain. It's really rooted in neuroscience, and it takes a fundamentally different angle on how to heal trauma. So, what is DBR really? Well, think of it this way. It's a therapy that goes straight to the source. It targets the lightning-fast chain reaction that happens deep in your brainstem the instant a traumatic event occurs. It's like we're getting access to the brain's most primitive survival circuits, the ones that fire off way before you can even consciously think, I'm in danger. Now, this quote right here, this really gets to the heart of what makes DBR so different. It focuses on something called pre-affective shock. Just try to imagine that split second before you even feel fear or anger or sadness. It's that raw jolt, that pure physiological overwhelm that floods your system when something terrible happens. That's the moment DBR is designed to work with. So how on earth do you do that in a therapy session? Well, DBR helps a person slow that whole process down and trace that split-second trauma response as it unfolds, using a very precise step-by-step sequence. It's kind of like taking a lightning-fast, unconscious reaction and bringing it into the light of day, into conscious awareness, where you can actually process it. And this sequence, this is the roadmap for the whole therapy. It starts with orienting. The therapist helps the person tune in to that very first physical response to a memory or a trigger, which, funnily enough, often shows up as just a little bit of tension in the head or neck. That's the body's initial, "what's that?" reaction. Once they're grounded in that tension, then they can move on to processing the shock we just talked about. And finally, they allow the affect, the emotion tied to it all, to come to the surface. And this is where the brain science just gets so cool. Each step in that sequence maps directly onto a specific part of the brainstem, the most ancient, fundamental part of our brain. Orienting and tension, that's tied to the superior colliculus, which is like our primal built-in security camera. The shock involves the locus coeruleus, which is what cranks up our adrenaline. And the affect, the emotion, is linked to the periaqueductal gray. DBR is in essence a guided tour of this deep brain survival pathway. Okay, so the theory sounds really compelling, right? But the big question is, does it actually work? Well, that's what this study set out to discover. This is the first ever randomized controlled trial of DBR, which means we are getting our very first look at some real, hard data on how effective it is for treating PTSD. The way they set up the study was really straightforward. They took 54 people with PTSD and randomly put them into one of two groups. The first group got 8 weekly sessions of DBR, all done over video conference. The other group, the waitlist control, they didn't get any therapy during that same time period. So here we go, the big question. After those 8 weeks, did DBR actually make a difference? Let me tell you, the results are, well, they're pretty remarkable. Just take a look at this chart. This shows how severe the PTSD symptoms were, measured using the gold standard assessment tool. The DBR group, there on the left, had this huge drop in symptoms compared to the folks on the waitlist. And this wasn't just a temporary boost. These improvements were still holding strong 3 months later. And honestly, this might just be the most powerful finding in the entire study. 3 months after treatment ended, 52%. That's more than half of the people who got DVR no longer met the clinical criteria for a PTSD diagnosis. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they had recovered. Just to put that into perspective, only one single person in the waitlist group could say the same. Hey, remember that high dropout rate we talked about earlier for other therapies? Well, in this study, the dropout rate for DBR was just 4.3%. Only one person out of the whole group stopped treatment. That tells us something really important. DBR isn't just effective, it seems to be a therapy that people can actually stick with. So, what's the takeaway here? What does all this mean for the big picture? Well, these early results are incredibly promising, and they could really signal a major shift in how we think about healing from trauma. Okay, let's just boil it all down. This first clinical trial suggests that DBR is a really powerful tool for treating PTSD. It leads to real, lasting relief. It's a therapy people can actually complete, which is huge. And the fact that it was delivered effectively online, that means it could be accessible to almost anyone, anywhere. Now, of course, this is just one study, and more research is definitely needed. But it opens up such a fascinating door. By going straight to those automatic, deep brain reactions that fuel trauma, DBR offers a new path that gets right to the root of the problem. And it leaves us with a pretty powerful question. What if the key to healing our most profound wounds isn't found in our complex thoughts, but in our most primal, basic instincts?